Gang, for over a year now, I've been talking about True Hemp Science full spectrum CBD oils and how they've reduced my anxiety and helped me get better sleep without waking up feeling foggy and confused. I've also talked about the full spectrum CBD bombs that relieved my hand pain last year and made playing piano and guitar much easier. Well, gang, today I'm going to tell you about True Hemp Science organic gummies made with full spectrum hemp oil that are available now. They come in two different gauges. There are 50 milligram ones that have 50 milligrams of CBD and 1.5 milligrams of THC. Then there are ones that are 100 milligrams of CBD and 5 milligrams of THC. Absolutely delicious lemon lime / orange flavors and also watermelon black cherry flavors. Super, super delicious. Now, they also have a complete line of full spectrum CBD products, including oils, tinctures, skincare lotions, sports rubs, chocolates, gummies, all kinds of stuff. Well, gang, How Did I Get Here has teamed up with True Hemp Science to bring you a very special offer that benefits all of us. Spend $100 or more at truehempscience.com and you will get a free gift. Just enter the code HDIGH at checkout. There's a little code placed there for you to enter it, HDIGH, and you will get a free gift with purchase. That's right. Go to truehempscience.com and balance your body and mind with True Hemp Science. Let's get down.
And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
It's time for How Did I Get Here? And now here is your host,
Robert Harrison of Cotton Mather. Really quickly, welcome to the show. Also, today, this isn't just How Did I Get Here? I'm also sharing co-hosting duties with my dear old friend, Hobart Rowland, host and producer of Magnet Classics podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. You know I'm a big fan of that show. When you first told me about that show, I was freaking out on you. And then the one thing that I will say upsets me about your show is that it doesn't come out like 5 times a week.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
Very work intensive. But you were kind of my mentor, Johnny. You.
That's nice to hear.
You encouraged me. You introduced me to all the high tech wonders of GarageBand.
Grandpa to grandpa.
Yeah. And I figured it out, and it was nice because it was like a kind of a translation of what I was doing for Magnet in print. Which was these Magnet Classics where we were doing these sort of oral histories. And it's kind of fun to string all of these quotes together and try to make a story out of it. Some are easier than others, but yeah.
This is a less post-production, labor-intensive version, but today we'll be talking to the immensely talented Robert Harrison about the classic Cotton Mather album, Kontiki, that turned 25 in last November, officially.
Yes.
But like it basically... These 2 years was its release sort of like it had a long coming out.
It did, because it was released on a tiny label out of Houston,
Copper Records.
Copper.
Yeah.
And he was a very modest operation.
What was that?
Let's just say Daryl Klingman.
Very enthusiastic, but very modest.
enthusiastic. Yeah.
Yes, he just didn't have. He had good ideas. He just didn't have the bankroll to do much with it, and so. It was, I believe, in the fall of 1999, I got a call from a label in London that wanted to put it out there. And that's when it started clicking, because it, apart from, a few writers, and he did hire, Daryl, I'm speaking of, did hire a very good college radio promoter. The one thing he spent money on was a guy to get it to radio. Radio played it. It got up as high very quickly to number 12 on the college non-com charts until people realized that it wasn't available. So it just wasn't in stores, and so they couldn't continue to plug it. But it did make a splash. Then it went away very quickly, and it got into the hands of some people who were what we would now call influencers.
How old was Ron Wood when he was doing the influencing? Was he like 73 or something like that?
I don't know. That I don't know.
How old were you when you made that record? Just kind of.
Let's see. I would have been, just past 30.
Okay.
So yeah, 30.
I think its lack of availability initially also added, and not that it would, I don't want to take away from the music, but it added to this mystique, the mysterious Kontiki album. Like I had a friend that I have this great story. This friend in Philadelphia that I had the one copy that I brought back from me. From Houston, and he loved the album so much that it just managed to just vanish. I never saw it again.
I did hear that a lot. That people would say, "I had a copy, but I gave it to somebody,
and then I never got it back."
Right?
yeah, which
Yeah.
adds to the mystique.
I had that happen as well.
Is that the mystique of the classic Lost Power Pop album? Isn't there? There's always like some weird, like Jellyfish, Big Star.
Oh yeah, I think
Cotton Mather Kontiki. You know what I mean? Like there's always some weird story like it's like.
And I think it ranks up there with those records. I mean, I really
totally
do.
100%.
I mean, and I'm not just blowing smoke. I think it really ranks up there with like Spilt Milk, Jellyfish, Kontiki, Cotton Mather. I mean, all those kind of great Lost, the Badfinger stuff, and then Daryl did that Badfinger tribute album, which was really great.
That's how I met him.
Yeah.
That's how he came into my. And I remember you were on there, and Amy Mann was on there. I remember.
Yeah, it was a good, and he did a really good job on it.
Was on there.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, it had some great stuff on it. But what I was gonna, if you don't mind, what I was gonna jump in.
Our show.
What I was gonna ask you is, Cotton Mather generated some buzz on that first record. And then you guys, what happened between that first record and Kontiki that kind of was a shift for you? Well,
there were a lot of things that happened. The Cotton Mather story really starts in 1990. And so to contextualize Kontiki, you have to go back further than that 94 record. But 94's record, which was a studio recording with a producer named Brian Martin, who was this kind of amazing militant recording guy who had this very specific way of doing things, which was I now look at what he did with awe. But it was the culmination of an ascent from a place of nothing to getting signed, to getting courted by labels and all the stuff that well. You go through this process of, you start having band meetings and dreams, and you have these discussions, and then people begin giving you all kinds of advice, and you're suddenly on this kind of a journey.
Yeah.
But Cotton Mather's inception was a very anti-musical or it was an abnormal group. It was just myself and a cellist, and we were making noise, and we were making a lot of experimental things. And then as we became a band, I evolved into, I was trying to push songs to kind of a breaking point. And what we discovered...
in what way?
The stuff that I was listening to when I came out to Austin was, I had been in Athens, and we're talking about the late 80s, and I'd seen a lot. I was really into bands like Let's Active and the Clash, and that was where I was at, and the Replacements. And then I saw Fred Frith at the Uptown Lounge, who was this experimental, very seminal experimental guitarist of this almost anti-musical trip. And I got very interested in that, and Trout Mask Replica, and then SST bands. And by the time I came out to Austin and quickly discovered that they had roots rock covered, which is one of this kind of ideas that I had, because I thought I either wanted to do something very theatrical in this sort of rockabilly vein, because that was a passion of mine.
Right.
And I thought, I came out here and went, well, they've got that.
Yeah.
Because this is pre-internet. We're speaking the late 80s. So they didn't need another guy, wearing black and playing Shaking All Over, you know?
Right.
But they did seem to have a wide open frontier when it came to more arty stuff. The band that was happening then that I really was into was Glass Eye. There was a band called Miracle Room. So I thought, well, this kind of way out in left field thing, which is where I was at in terms of my listening, in terms of my passion, I thought that's where I want to go. So I met this cellist, and we began doing this kind of noisy stuff where we thought we can take songs and take the song form and make it just listenable. You know, there was the record that was more in a pop vein that I liked a lot, that I was listening to a lot around that time, was that XTC record that came out in '85, pre-Skylarking, Big Express.
Oh, yeah.
Which is very edgy, and there's a lot of
for
upside down
XTC,
beats.
that was very edgy.
It was an odd record.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
thought, well, that's interesting.
Right.
I just didn't know enough about music to do that musically. So we just made noise.
Right.
And then I began, along the way, once we had Wendy March and Owen McMahon in the group, and we were calling it Cotton Mather in this kind of absurdist way. It was just a lot of absurd songs. And then I wrote a few songs, and everyone was delighted because they had choruses and melodies. And then, as you know, from being in a band,
Yeah.
if you've been out in front of audiences, and the audiences we were having were very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
But they were almost enthusiastic as if they were witnessing a spectacle. And then when we did these other kind of songs, they had a reaction of being delighted. And if you've been on stage, which you've been a lot,
Yeah.
you read the room at some point and go, I like it when they like it.
Yeah.
I feel better about myself
Yeah.
when the audience is smiling. And so it began to morph into a more song-based outfit.
So the audience actually, that's interesting. The audience actually pushed you in a more musical direction.
The audience and the idea that there was something that I was clearly able to do that was setting me apart, to where I recognized, because I saw a lot of music, I thought, well, I'm able to do this kind of a song thing.
Right.
Which seems to stand out a little bit, so maybe I'm better at this.
Right.
Plus, I just love music. I just love songs. And so, and the lyrical component. I
Right.
seem to have a very easy facility for that. And so once that began, and I'm getting to your question, long way to it,
No, you're getting there.
things began to sort of coalesce around the idea of, oh, we're a band, and now we have a second guitarist, and the cellist, who is extremely important to the founding of the idea of Cotton Mather. He sort of began to run out of a job because there just wasn't as much for him to do, and he took his leave. I don't know if you remember Nat at all, Nat Shelton. He was kind of my first real music partner in here, and Matt Hovis stepped sort of into that role, and Matt and I began to dream this other group, and then we decided to wear suits, and then suddenly then the people began to show up, and the idea began to take root in me that, well, wait a second, I could make money at this, and I could, I was really in a relationship that looked like we were going to get married, and this could be a living. So once you step on that train, and you have all these people telling you, I don't think I entirely lost my way, but I did lose the initial plot, which was to do things that were a little more challenging.
Yeah.
And it was challenging enough to make a record, but suddenly, and I'm sure you had the same thing happen, when you start off, there's suddenly a lot of people that know a lot more than you, willing to share their knowledge.
Yeah.
Until you get to a place where maybe you make something and go, well, I know I took all this advice, but I don't like the way it came out.
Yeah, but does challenging necessarily have to mean that it's not song structures and melody? And I mean,
Not at all.
yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, to me, it's that, I think there's a lot that's challenging about Kontiki.
Oh, no, we got there.
Yeah, you got there, and it's still ridiculously catchy at the same time.
That was the breakthrough.
Yeah.
So at the end of '94, the record label Elm that had signed us, and we had made this record, and we had tried to do everything as well as we could.
Yeah.
The record didn't really succeed, but more importantly to me, I had to be honest with myself. I even once got high and listened to it to think if I would see if I'd like it more. It's like maybe I just haven't listened to it high, and I liked it less.
Yeah.
It bummed me out even more. And I ran into Nat Shelton in Chicago when we were doing some touring, and he told me he was working for Whole Foods up there, and we had a beer. And after a few beers, he said, he confessed to me that he didn't like it, and I told him I'm having the same problem, and he was just, and he wasn't not liking it because he was in the group. He was disappointed because he'd been very much looking forward to the ascension, coming to this place where a guy he really liked was going to make the record. And I'm not trying to knock that record. I think it's got a lot going for it. It wasn't what I set out to do. And so what happened in 94 was several things. Crucially, my mother passed away right as we were about to go off on tour with Hootie and the Blowfish, and that had a massive impact on me. Wait a minute,
say that again. You're about to go on tour with Hootie and the Blowfish.
Right. We're about
It's
to go
such a heavy statement.
I know. You kind of
And then followed with this absurd statement.
Right. And
Okay, go ahead.
Which is
the way the world worked back then.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going on tour with who? And they were just beginning to happen. I think Cracked Rear View had just come out, but they were big enough to where people were extremely annoyed when we came out on stage and we weren't Hootie and the Blowfish.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
And it was a mismatch.
Yeah.
Plus, Matt had decided that he wasn't going to do Cotton Mather anymore. He was really a visual artist waiting to take that path. And he had decided, so we had done some touring. The record was, puttering along, and Matt took his leave, and we got a guy named Brett Bowen, who had originally played with myself and Nat, to fly it out from Seattle to do those tours with us. And at the end of all that, which would have been October-ish, several things happened. The drummer he hadn't left yet, but he was about to. Matt had left, and the label ended.
What was that drummer guy's name?
Greg Thibault.
Greg.
Phenomenal musician.
I worked with, I knew him when I worked at Whole Foods
Sure.
because his girlfriend, I can't remember Anne, that's right.
Yeah.
Did
She
everybody
worked
work
there. She
at
worked
Whole
with
Foods?
me. Yeah, it was
I
part
worked
of the
at
thing.
Wheats, but I worked at Wheatsville.
You worked at Wheatsville. It's like Whole Foods, Wheatsville, or a Thundercloud.
That's right.
That was a big.
was the
Those were big
trifecta.
musician, jobs.
But I had the. It was great. It was great to play with Greg. He was maybe the most talented musician I've ever played with in some respects. He just, to my way of thinking, and I think he would agree, he wasn't really well suited for what the musician's life entailed. And so by the time 95 came around, the only guy left in the room who had been there for Cotton is King was Whit, and he had been doing things that were more or less scripted up till then, but he was beginning to develop a voice within my new songs, and so he and I began to dial that in, and then we met Dana Miser, and he was close friends with George Reef, who I'd only met when he said no to making my wedding cake. And he told me that I was the only person he turned down for the wedding cake.
I'll tell you, that guy who passed 5-6 years ago now.
2017.
Jesus. What a lovely man. Was such a huge fan of yours. Always like. I think that might have been where I first heard Kontiki was from him.
Well, George was a really generous person.
Truly.
Who had it in his spirit to support whoever he was playing with in a way that was he was very smart, and it was not calculated, although maybe a little bit because he was smart this way. George made himself invaluable to the people he worked with, and he did it out of he was he was good at building his career, but he did it out of passion, and he found something to really love about the people he worked with. But he and I genuinely became, best friend in my life.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it happened over time. He played with Cotton Mather, not even a full year live, but he showed up when it came time to record Kontiki. And so, have I answered your question by route of back to 1990?
How about some context for how these songs came together? I mean, were the songs on this record written in a spurt of creativity, or were they kind of written over a longer period of time, or how did that go?
Sure. Coming after 94, I went through a real dead zone of creativity, and I hadn't figured out yet how to assimilate a lot of change. First of all, the death of a parent, which was shocking, and then I also, when we were what they would have called then a baby band when we went out on the road to do Kontiki. We hadn't really done any touring. And those songs had been written. I worked very, very hard on writing songs, writing lots and lots of songs. And I was writing, I would say, maybe from more of a cerebrally centered place.
Yeah.
They were literate. They were clever. They really were more in the vein of something like They Might Be Giants. Mm-hmm. And what I discovered when we went out and played live outside of Austin, where we didn't have a room full of adherents and fans and family and all that, was I would notice a lot of brow furrowing as they were trying to catch our songs as they were flying by. Usually played a little too quickly with a million chord changes, or as George used to say to me when I was showing him a new song, he would say, "Man, can you slow down? I'm kind of in a forest of chords."
Yeah.
And so, I noticed as you go out on tour, you see what works well. It's just like a run of a play. You go out on those first nights and you see, well, this line didn't really land, and we need to tweak this and that. I went out on the road with Cotton Mather in our sharkskin suits with all our punchy, intelligent songs, and found out that it wasn't really easily connecting with audiences. And furthermore, that there was music I was hearing that was, especially the stuff we were playing in the van. Mm-hmm. What worked in the van tended to work in the venues. Mm-hmm. Right. And I began to kind of understand that I had written from a place of almost from theorizing what a rock band should do rather than living it.
Right. There's a fantastic article from 2012 that Greg Beats wrote for the Chronicle. A great article. But in that is where I discovered that transition of sort of going from a cerebral place to a more emotional place. And it's like, then Kontiki is like the album that takes you from April's Fool to like Lily Dreams On.
Sure. And
here's this new guy that's able to access this level of emotion that can really connect with people.
And it took some doing, because the songs which you asked about, the first ones weren't quite there. They were trying to dig into a more primal place, because the locus of where I was coming from was trying to shift from the kind of upper chakras to the middle and lower chakras with respect to where the writing center, where the emotional stuff was coming from, that it was just falling out. Mm-hmm. But it was choppy at first, and I wrote several songs that I got together with Whit on, and one of the dangers of playing with a really great player and collaborating with a really great player is they can play something really great with your highly mediocre song. and then you might decide you've written a good song.
Right.
And so Whit has the ability to take something mediocre and make it appear better than it is. And I recognized that quickly when we played a few things live, and I thought, well, that's not very good, really, as we recorded some demos. But over time, I think towards the end of 95, I was sitting at the breakthrough song on Kontiki, both in recording and the writing, is the song Autumn's Birds, which I wrote the night before I flew to Ireland. I started it in 95, and I got to Ireland, and I was in this hotel room just looking out at the ocean in Dunleary, and I wrote that song, and then I began, that broke the barrier. It all began to fall out at that time. I had started this song, Vegetable Row, and abandoned it, and then I picked that up, and a bunch of them got written in Ireland, so there was that burst, and then there was a second burst of those in the spring, enough to where by summer of 96 or spring of 96, I had begun playing some of these for George and Dana, and Whit I had begun to show these to. And he was, we were working on some cool guitar stuff together. And then as I showed the stuff to George and Dana, they became very excited. And, now this is different. This is great. But we were too good. we made it too good. And we got together with Dave McNair, and we began to make these recordings with Dave. Dave, and you know Dave.
Fabulous, yeah. Engineer and producer.
Incredible.
Yeah, I know Dave too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he, I think George and Dana approached him, and they thought, we need to get, the conclusion I drew, Hobart, from Cotton is King, because I had signed on for this idea of, okay, we got a producer, we sign a record deal, we're going to follow all this advice we're getting from our attorney and from the publicist, and we're going to be the band. But essentially, when you're in that mode, when you're the band that doesn't know what they're doing, they're in the studio, they don't have much experience, once the song is written, the creative part of it, it's a little bit over.
Yeah.
Then you're handing it over to others, and you're following instruction. Oh, you need another vocal take. What was wrong with that? It was a little flat.
Yeah.
And then you're really power sharing, which for some people would be good, but it wasn't right for me.
Hey gang, it's Johnny. After we had this conversation, Robert Harrison hit me to the fact that there was some stuff that he still wanted to say. So I asked him if he would please record it on his own at his place and send it to me, and I would insert it in the podcast at the appropriate place. So this is the appropriate place, and this is Robert Harrison from his house.
After our interview was done, I realized there were a few elements of the story I had managed to leave out, which I think are fairly important to understanding why Kontiki happened when it happened in the way that it did. The origins of Cotton Mather are helpful to put it in context, because it started as an experimental group with my friend Nat Shelton, the cellist, where we were making these arbitrary recordings of wind chimes and transcribing those into cello notes. And then over time we had evolved into a song-centric band, and as a song-centric group that became more of a two-guitar bass drum affair, and the cellist left, we were following a more conventional playbook, I think you could say, and with the conventional path that we were on, we were trying to do things as we were best advised to do. What I discovered there after making the recordings at the Hit Shack with the guys in the summer of 96 is that maybe, since I had checked all the boxes once again, that the conventional playbook was not for me, or at least that perhaps it might not be. And so there was the convergence of these three things that happened to illustrate that, or to really drive the point home. The first was that Will Sharp, who had been the manager of Elm Records, and Dave McNair, independently of one another, had taken the three Hit Shack songs around and shopped them in L.A. and found no takers. And then the Autumn's Birds accident, when the track went away there, allowed me to hear for my own self the central character in the Cotton Mather catalog show up for the first time. And I think I had been absent until then. I didn't know that that's what we were really missing, but for whatever reason, once everything fell apart and was completely disassembled, I had the space to show up. with that knowledge in my hip pocket, I wasn't quite so distraught as I would have been otherwise when George Reef came to me in August and told me, "Look, I love you. I love this music, but I'm going to have to go and take a gig on the road." I can't remember if he went off with Charlie Sexton or perhaps Kelly Willis or Bruce Robeson, but he was going to be gone. And he told me, "Listen, I'll be around at times, and I'll still help when I can." And then not long after that, Dana Miser had an offer from the artist on Mercury, Mary Cutrofello, to play drums with her, and he took that gig, even being even more forthright in his, allegiance to the Cotton Mather Project. When he left, he told me, "This is my passion, and when I'm in town and I can do it, I'm going to do it." But nonetheless, there in the end of summer, 96, I had no band, no producer, no studio, and no label deal. And if I had wanted to see what things were like for me, if they were entirely disassembled, I got my wish. So it was with a little bit of confidence that I sat down with Whit in September and said, "Look, I think I'm going to be the one to produce this." Because this is what I had going for me. I had these songs that I believed in. I had this bandmate in Whit with whom I had forged this good 2-guitar attack, and the keys to this little studio in Leander, Texas, with a ADAT machine and a little bit of gear. So the origins of Kontiki really start from there, when everything had come to a complete halt. And as much as I'd like to say, hey, I just fell back on my roots as an more experimental artist, it was really more of a sense of falling back on instincts and just trying to make something out of nothing, so that Kontiki songs were taken one by one. And I think that's part of why it's such a cohesive record, because each song is making no attempt to connect to the one prior. It's 14 little universes of discovery, because I took each one as a problem to be solved, and in so doing was just trying to create something. And so with Homefront Cameo, the first order of business, well, what's the rhythm section going to be? George and Dana aren't here. I created something with a tape of a Tunisian drummer, where I found this little piece of music where he was going, and I ran that through a ring modulator, put it on 4-track cassette, put that in the computer and looped it. Got together with Darren Murphy out in the country, and Darren did the beat that I was hearing, which was found the best, 10 seconds of that, made another loop of that, and that became the foundational bed track for the song Homefront Cameo. And I heard that working, the guitar stuff sounded great, and we built that song. And so I also found some recordings of some Italian opera I had gotten off the radio late at night a few years before, and that's how it all started. So each song was just taken as a puzzle to be solved. Now, as that happened, I did begin to recognize that this had a special emotional resonance, because when everything was having to be assembled in such a personal way, seat of the pants, for some reason that central character, that voice, was very much at home. And in the ensuing years, I learned how to occupy that space without having things completely destroyed. But it's still a healthy thing to let things fall apart. And I think to some extent, that's why I've always thought Cotton Mather a bit of a peculiar fit for this genre, you call power pop, whereas I see some of the connecting DNA. I have an attitude which is very much counter to a designed outcome or something that's crafted. The songs are just crafted in and of themselves well enough to withstand stress. So one of the first things I try to do when I record is keep everyone off balance, and that gets the best outcome, or at least an outcome that I'm more interested in. So I'd much rather hear guys like George Reef and Dana Miser recorded on 2 channels of a 4-track cassette than recorded at Ocean Way, where I'm just going to hear things as they should be, or as I might expect them to be. You know, that's why you get a song like Church of Wilson, where Darren has heard the song once and he's recording it. And, you know, I've got a power drill going in the song. I blew up my Roland Space Echo while I was doing the lead vocal. But that seems to be a fine thing on the record next to Vegetable Row, which has a bit more of a kind of traditional American rock and roll backdrop. And as these things came together one by one, we used to joke, are we really making these songs for just ourselves or someone else? Should we just bury them in the backyard and talk about the record once a year? Both being public or private about it seemed entirely plausible at the time. And I think that's why it has such a visceral connection with people even today, because I think a lot of those problems that were dogging us in the music industry have only been amplified over the years, especially with social media and all the scrutiny on the end game as opposed to the process. Kontiki is a celebration of the process of creation. This was a reclamation of joy. That was the whole nature of it.
Thanks, Robert. That was helpful. Now back to my place with me, Johnny Gowdy, Hobart Rowland from Magnet Classics Podcast, and the great Robert Harrison from Cotton Mather.
Yeah.
So our first impulse when Cotton is King didn't do that well was to say, well, now we've got the right rhythm section, and now we've got the right producer, and now we've got all the stuff that maybe we didn't quite have right.
Right.
Now it's going to work.
Yeah.
And then I had the same reaction when I heard the stuff we did with Dave, and Dave heard it too, which is, well, everything's exactly as it's supposed to be, and it's still not feeling right.
Yeah.
And I didn't even need to get high to conclude that this time, you know. I was just already high.
Right. Did you, was like the character...
And that's not Kontiki. I'm saying that, so we made an attempt at some of those songs.
Right, right. And I've been in that situation where you go and you
I'm
record
sure you
and it's in
have.
it's the best situation you can imagine.
Right.
You know, you're really doing it this time. And then all of a sudden the character of what makes your music and you and your band all so unique somehow gets
left
lost
out.
in translation.
Yeah, how is it my friend Randy Grace said to me one time when he was listening to something we had done, he said, how is the most interesting guy I know able to leave everything interesting about himself behind when he steps in the studio?
Yeah.
You know, and he was not just saying that about me, he was saying that about other people.
Sure.
You know, it's like, how is it that what makes you so unique and appealing getting left out? And that's not an uncommon story. It's probably more the norm.
Well, it's so common that Dave McNair took it upon himself to, like, it's not like he got fired. It's
No.
like he was like, you're the character. Go do this.
He got frustrated with me. And because I can drive people kind of crazy. And because they're, I mean, I was, when I was about 11, I was in Charleston with the family. My family, we were walking around Charleston. This story just came to me because it's the same kind of story. And poor Dave is in the role of my father in this story. I saw at some point when I was walking around Charleston with my brother a magazine of a race car, and I saw it in the window, and I wanted that magazine so bad, and I looked at it for a long time, and then I told my father that night I want to go back to that store, but I couldn't find the store. And then we went to other stores looking for this race car magazine. And we went to every store in Charleston. And he said, son, do you even know what we're looking for? And I said, no, I don't. I don't know what the race, and that was kind of like Dave looking at me going, you need to go find out for yourself. Right. Sorry about the race car story.
No, that was
That's a
great.
good race cars. Yeah.
So when you went, had you already done stuff on 4-track? Like in the expanded version of Kontiki, there's all this stuff. Was some of that stuff what you had taken to Dave originally?
I think maybe I had done a few little demos that I was working on. So I had been 4-tracking stuff since I started doing music in college. and been playing around with found sound and pieces of tape, I stumbled into one of those college stories where you accidentally take a class and it turns out not to be an accident. I had tried to take my second year in college a computer class because everyone was telling me, because this is the 80s, it was like, computers are the thing of the future. You need to take a computer class. And I went and talked to my advisor, Sam Lloyd, and he got me into a computer class. And I went to the computer class, but they'd already had the first day. Right. And I went to the class, and it was a lab, and everyone was working, and I was maybe 5 minutes late, and I was there for about half an hour, and I couldn't turn the computer on. And so rather than asking someone, how do you turn on the computer? I dropped the class. I went right back to Sam Lloyd and said, I don't like the computer class at all. And I thought to myself, maybe the computer's not going to work out for people. And he said, well, you started, you play guitar, and he was a great guy, Sam. And he said, well, let's get you something in the music department. And the only thing that had vacancy was something called techniques of recording.
Oh, cool.
And it was a bizarre class where really the guy teaching it was more into music concrete and soundscapes and chant splicing. And he talked about Stockhausen and stuff like this. And I learned there was a lab, and I met a guy, and he helped me show me how to thread the tape and all this stuff. So I began doing these fun little tapes. It was just purely by accident. And he would tell us, the only thing you have to remember if you want to A in the class is that tape should be stored tails out. And I'll give you an A. And I remember thinking it was, the strangest thing about the class to me was that I'd never seen an adult with braces.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that was very, very interesting.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that spirit made it onto like the opening of the record, and then on Prophecy for the Golden Age.
Oh, yeah.
Like that.
So what happened was that Dave became frustrated, and he said to me, he said, there is no race car magazine, is there? And I said, no, it doesn't exist. And he said, and he pointed to a utility closet and said, you're the kind of artist, I think if I lock in this closet with a 4-track and a microphone and a guitar, you'll make something better than what we've been working on. And I knew intuitively he was right. And so Joe McDermott, who is a friend of mine who had a children's music career going.
Sorry to interrupt you. What was his band? I did shows
Grains
with
of Faith.
Grains of Faith.
Incredibly great band.
Great band.
Great band. And they ruled for a good solid year and a half. They were the thing in Austin, you know. And for longer than that, they were great, but they had a real peak. And Joe and I had lived together for a while, and he was always this sort of angel in my life. And he said, well, if in between, after the Elm thing didn't work out, he said, if you want to do demos, come out to my place in the country, and I'll show you how to do ADAT recording. And he gave me the basics, and he knew I was fairly remedial with the gear, and so he wanted to make sure I didn't blow anything up, which I did. But and so I began doing stuff like that. But I always done 4-track and sound collecting.
Right. So was this one ADAT?
One ADAT.
That was it. 8 tracks.
Well, 7 because one is SMPTE.
Okay, right.
So, Does that...
Yeah. You guys are getting way too technical for the music.
Well,
journalists
ADAT was you probably remember ADAT.
Yeah, I remember ADAT. Yeah.
They were pretty gnarly recording format, but they were tape.
Yeah. I find it interesting, though, that you were pursuing a style of recording that is now quite common now. I mean, is doing it all yourself.
Home
recording.
There was like a whole movement. We knew each other. That's what I was doing all the time.
Yeah.
Darren was like the fucking Tom Lord Algae of 4-track recording.
Yeah.
And then fastball. The first time I ever heard the way. This is funny. Was at my weed dealer's house because somebody in fastball had slid him the 4-track of the way.
Oh,
and he played
if you
it
listen to the demo
like
for Way, it's nothing like what came out in the finished product. It's almost like it has a very Mexican sort of
Right.
sway to it that kind of goes sucked out by the production of the more commercial version of that. But yeah, I guess my point was it just seems like you were pursuing this at a time where it was just starting.
Well, the band that grabbed me when we were touring, the two bands I listened to incessantly when we were touring were Ween and Guided by Voices.
Yeah, I was gonna say Guided by Voices.
Those were the two bands that I thought,
Magnet cover
these
band.
guys are doing everything that I want to be doing, and the degraded sound of the songs coming through in this murky way make them more emotional to me.
Me too.
Because for me, it is an example of something that I always love. One of my favorite sounds in a recording is of a distant warbly piano. Like if you hear the Louis Armstrong Hot 5 recordings and it's his wife playing the piano and it sounds like she's
amazing.
down the hall.
Yeah.
So cool.
It's going to be more emotional to me than Brad Meldau's perfectly recorded piano,
Right.
because the thing about the distant piano is it sounds like it almost didn't happen.
Yeah.
But
You almost didn't get to hear it.
But let's be honest, though, the finished product, Kontiki, does not sound lo-fi. Like per what somebody's like traditional definition of lo-fi.
Right. Well,
you know what I mean? It doesn't sound
sure.
like the early guy. It doesn't sound like B1000, for example, or it doesn't sound like.
Well, the music wouldn't have lent itself to that.
Yes, correct.
Right. I've
So,
been listening to the 2012 release.
It's the same.
It's the same.
First disc one is exactly
Exactly the same.
it
Okay.
is.
No
Yeah.
difference.
Well, I was going to say, like, some of those 4-track things on the second disc they sound amazing. Like, they sound really good and strong. It's not like
Well, they got mixed.
yeah.
So, the person mixing it did well. I mean, I think those were probably mostly mixed by Lars in 2011 or 2012 coming up for that.
Lars Goranson, not Ulrich.
Lars Goranson. All right, we love Lars.
Yeah.
So, I think the thing about Kontiki, though, is that, well, I'll tell you, there was a moment that opened the whole thing up for me. And going back to my interest in the avant-garde music, there was this art exhibit I went to see right before I moved out to Austin, around the time I'd seen Fred Frith, where he's talking, because he was like doing crazy stuff on stage that seemed not musical, but it was kind of working, and it was arbitrary, and it seemed like that. So I saw this art exhibit, and I was trying to, I think it was Rauschenberg and Motherwell, and I think it's Rauschenberg, because I was really interested in this, who said, you don't ever know, if you're honest, and of course I'm paraphrasing, I might be wrong, if you're honest, you don't ever set out to make a work of art. It's something that happens in between your effort at making an art and life, and so this is why he would grab the things arbitrarily,
Right.
and made all these collages, and allowed the chance accident to find its way, which is what I was doing with all these field recording things that I would be messing with. And what I didn't when I said I wasn't good enough to do the thing I wanted to do by pushing music, that would have been done with music. What I discovered is I listened to Wayne and Got It by Voice. Like, well, you can, if you got the right songs, you can see how much the song can withstand. And that would be much more interesting, because in corporate world of what is it that the record labels and all the people who are the support system for your career, what are they all looking for? That rarest of commodities. Oh, they've got the songs.
Yeah.
They've got the songs, and songs are treated as this precious thing that you must be very, very correct with and careful with, and you've got to get the right kick drum sound, and you've got to get all these things right. And so around the time Dave was saying this to me, I was thinking, what is more interesting is to see not how well you can record the songs, but how much the songs are the songs good enough to withstand me as the guy in charge, and that would be a more interesting experiment. And so that's and so the breakthrough of that, and I thought this was, I was just visiting with my friend Matt Hovis about this. There was a day where I went over to Matt's with I was going to go to his house that night and play him the Dave recordings, because instead of getting high, I was just going to take it to Matt to see if he liked it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if you work hard on anything, you really want someone to say,
Yeah.
my God, there is a new Messiah in town.
Yeah.
You want that reaction.
Yeah.
But all you have to do is hit play, and you'll emotionally inform yourself straight away.
Yeah.
Before a note is sung, how you feel about it.
Right.
That's what Lars likes to say. You don't know if you've done something good until you play it for someone else.
Right.
By the way you feel. But that day I thought, well, I think I'll take Matt something that I've done out here in the country, show him what I'm working on. So I drove out to Leander, where this house was, and there was Joe had a computer that was, one of those that looks like 5 feet deep now.
Yeah.
And he had this program you may remember called Cakewalk.
Uh-huh.
And Cakewalk furnished these MIDI files that you would play on the keyboard that would, in this case, the skeletal framework for the song, where I would have drums, I had maybe some keyboards, had 2 or 3 instruments, probably a tambourine or maybe a harpsichord, but all the stuff that they did.
Yeah.
And then I would use that to play along with and build the song. Yeah. And the song that I thought that I had just done, that I thought was really cool, was Autumn's Birds. Mm-hmm. And I went out there, had gone out a couple of days before and played the bass on that. And I listened to it, thought, well, this is cool, and had this drum machine going, and all the MIDI instruments.
Yeah.
And I went out that day, and I couldn't get his once again, the computer didn't come on. There's a theme here. I couldn't turn on the computer. I couldn't get Cakewalk going. And I thought, well, damn. And I kept hitting the ADAT because it syncs to the SMPTE.
Right.
And it wouldn't sync. And at some point, I was listening to what was in the room and went, oh, my God, that's it. With all that stuff gone, missing its skeletal framework.
Oh, right.
With it missing, what was missing made it heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And suddenly that vocal and that bass and those things were just floating. And I got very emotional, and I quickly, duped a cassette of that. And so after Matt and I listened to the Hit Shack stuff, and with Dave, and he listened to 3 songs, he said all the things you'd want oh, wow, the drums sound great.
Yeah.
Dude, this is really, really impressive,
Yeah.
But I could tell he didn't love it. And I said, well, there's one other thing. And I was disappointed. So check this out. I popped in the Autumn's Birds thing, and he sat there, and his eyes teared up, and he looked at me and said, that's it. You did it. You just found it. What is that? I said, well, this is this other thing. So that was September or August of 96. So I invited Whit to go to Kirby Lane with me on my birthday, which is September 7th. And he said, well, happy birthday, buddy, and all that. I said, well, I wanted to tell you something. I know he's going to produce Kontiki. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to make the record, and I'm going to make it, I'll figure it out. And he was the only person I could probably say that to who wouldn't have wanted to talk me out of it.
Right.
He was like, it was so blasé. It's like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's great. So the thing that's important about the Autumn's Birds story is that, I think if you go to the idea of gaps, is that Kontiki gets told, you guys know how this thing works. You come up with a record, and you come up with music, and then there's a story about the music, right? And the story gets pitched by the publicist, like, it's unbelievable. After his alpine skiing accident, no one thought he'd ever walk again, and he was lying in bed, and he came up with this.
You have to have the backstory.
And the backstory is often a Against All Odds.
Yeah, yeah,
Overcoming
yeah.
adversity.
That's the most popular one. Drug rehab, overcoming adversity, bad breakup, passenger in your own band, van, or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
The Kontiki story was always told as, and understandably so, as a in spite of all odds, because they only had chewing gum and a coat hanger and a 4-track, and they lived on fried chicken.
Yeah.
But I was driving here and I was thinking, you know, the real story of Kontiki to me was, it wasn't a story of in spite of, it was a story of because of. Without those things, without Dana and George saying, we're leaving town, without Dave saying, go do it yourself, without all the things that went supposedly wrong, without the computer breaking,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have happened. And it started making it so the problem solving became the art.
Interesting.
That's why it worked that way. And I understood that if everything was fixed for us, if everything was handed to us, so with George and Dana, you played with those guys, right? You
Played with George, not Dana. Yeah.
incredible rhythm section.
Yeah.
But I couldn't show them a song, let them rehearse it, and then record it, because it sounded like the Letterman band.
Yeah.
It
Like
was too
Steely
good.
Dan or some shit. Yeah.
It would be too good.
Yeah.
And then I think, well, there's nothing left. I mean, I think about it from the point of view of a listener always. I always think of, well, what's in it for, what's there left for me to do?
Right.
Why do they need me
Right.
if they're this good? So Kontiki, they're hearing the songs, that, sometimes for the first time, or Darren, the first time he heard Church of Wilson, he played Church of Wilson. It's take 3. First thing you hear him say on the tape is, "Do you like the intro? I just met him." So there, in each song, there's something that has to be reckoned with that's kind of broken, because the idea was, when I heard the Autumn's Birds thing, I thought, well, now the song that should have been done beautifully with big drums and orchestra and all this stuff has to overcome something. And it's way more powerful.
Yeah.
So it's a deconstruction in some ways.
It's almost a deconstruction followed by a bad reassembly. I think so.
And it's interesting the way you talk about Kontiki, because I'm guessing that once the album was complete, and once you were happy with whatever that finished product was, it's like lightning in a bottle. You kind of knew it wasn't going to happen again, right? I mean, did you kind of know that when you finished it? I'm not going to make another record like this. That doesn't mean you're not going to make a better record.
No, I knew a few things straight away, and I'll tell you when I knew it. There was a lot of magic around that record, and I've talked a lot about just my own process of the artistry and of the kind of collage making. I would say, going back to that Rauschenberg statement that you never intend, if you're honest, I didn't know what I was doing. I was going on instinct. About like a month in, as we were making these trips out to Leander, I began to put it together. It was like, okay, we're working in the gaps. The problem solving is the record, and more importantly, it's working. And I felt like I was, I think the thing that Kontiki has that I'm sure some magical records have is that you begin to understand that the record has a life of its own,
right,
and that it's not you. Yeah. You're on the ride.
Yeah.
And it's telling you what to do.
Yeah.
And I've only had that experience a few times.
Yeah.
To where you began to realize, I'm riding a wave.
Right.
And I began to get that feeling and continue just to trust those abstract moments, like the beginning of the record, which is I just was recording George and Dana, and I accidentally noticed that I had it on the other side of the cassette, which was my before and after backwards.
Right.
So the record starting is my before and after. It's an early take of it.
Okay.
Backwards. I just had flipped I used the wrong tape.
Right.
It's like, oh crap, I've recorded on the wrong cassette, and then I heard the, and it was like, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So I began to trust the arbitrary moments, and then I began to actually pursue them a little bit.
With a record like this, how did you know when it was finished? I mean, this record
It told me.
Yeah.
How?
I picked it up one day.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
And I was sitting alone in my little house that we rented in Tarrytown, my wife and I. And the song that I had written was called The Gold Gone Days, which ends up being the last song on the double disc. And I had written the song, and I just sat there with I had this Hagstrom Viking guitar that I mic'd up just to record it because it had F-holes, but I didn't plug it in. And then when you plugged it in, it sounded god-awful. So I thought, well, I just started doing my Kontiki stuff. I'm sitting there in my room, and I'm just doing arbitrary things. And I sang the song, and something told me, that's not it anymore. It felt sort of deliberate.
Yeah.
It felt a little designed.
Yeah.
Which is everything Kontiki is not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It felt a little designed. Now, listening back, and when I played it for Lars, I said, oh, there's here's this song that was on there that was when I knew Kontiki was over. He goes, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's a great song. And it ends up being the last song. But there's a sadness to the Gold Gone Days because it's the end of Kontiki, and it's kind of like the last day of summer kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I just knew that whatever had been with me, whether it was kind of some aspect of my mother that was guiding me or whatever was happening, something had left.
It's gone.
It was gone. And
But
I could feel it right away.
Then there was a new beginning. Now it comes out and it goes to the college radio stations. And then how did it end up in the hands of Ron Wood? Like...
Well, I'm not entirely sure. What happened was that it came out. We put together a band with someone that you knew very well, Josh Gravlin.
Josh Gravlin, love Josh Gravlin.
So Josh Gravlin joined us. Once again, it was a birthday.
Right.
It was the next birthday.
Okay.
I never thought about that. So 1997, September 7th, Josh and Conrad, the only two guys who responded to I somehow met both of them. And we auditioned them both at the same time and thought, that's good enough. Because we were following this axiom that if you did everything the way that you were supposed to, you made Cotton is King.
Right.
Then if you did everything even like on steroids the way you were supposed to, you made the Hit Shack songs. Right. So let's do everything absolutely the opposite. It's like 12-year-olds building a fort.
Yeah.
And so let's. The label is called Copper. They've got no money. They're in Houston. Perfect. We'll say yes to that.
Yeah.
So we just said yes to everything that was absurdist, to do.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the first two people that showed up, if they were going to be, but they were good. It's like auditions are over. That's the band.
Yeah.
And so we began doing shows in the U.S. We had very limited funds, but at that point, one of my advocates had become Britt Daniel, who I gave a cassette tape to. And
Another 4-track guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With his Drake Tungsten identity.
Yeah.
And he gave it to some guys at Polygram who signed me to a writing deal. So we had a little bit of money through Polygram, which ended up getting written by Universal.
Was he already signed? Were they already signed to Elektra?
Yeah, they were at this point. I think they were on Elektra at this point. So he was really helpful. And so then there was a little money for some touring in the U.S. And that we went through that pretty quickly. Then in the spring of '98, Conrad joined a band. And Dana, who had been there for some of the Kontiki recordings, but with the problematic absences, he went off on tour with Mary Cutrofello. He called me one day, right around the time Conrad left, and said, "I really want to get off of this tour I'm on, and I want to play with you guys. If you've got an opening." So we began playing as Josh, Dana, Whit, and myself, and then that kind of ran its course, and I don't think anything was much happening. except I was beginning to write songs for what would become the big picture. And then this call comes in from this guy from New York who had a label in London, Jim McGarry. And he was so obnoxious to me when he called. He really turned me off. And I don't remember what he said, but I just thought, well, I'm not going to do anything with this guy. And he was persistent. Give him that. He was persistent. And then I was talking to our manager, Bennett, who was out in L.A., who was a big fan. And he said, well, you've got nothing happening. What can it hurt to give it to this label in England? I said, okay. And suddenly things began to happen. And what they had in England that we didn't have here was they had a publicist. They had a little bit of money. And it was a real label. Small label, but a real label. And Jim did a great job getting it out there. And so at some point, someone who had read an article in Uncut, there was this big review in Uncut in 99, I think around Christmas time. They took it.
Nice Christmas present. Nice Christmas
present.
present.
Yeah. And it ended up going to a party, a Boxing Day party. I think at Ron Wood's house.
Okay. All right. And that's where people heard.
And the Oasis guys were there. And so it began to kind of click at that point.
Because they were high and they liked it.
We don't know that they were getting high.
Okay.
One can only assume.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, had you already heard, like, at this point, like, when did you hear it, Hobart? When did you first hear Kontiki?
I heard it. I was friends with Daryl. And I heard it through Daryl.
And did you come to the famous Rudyard's gig?
Yes.
That's where I first met you.
Yes.
Which we played as a three-piece.
Yeah, exactly.
Which was an awesome gig.
It was a great gig. You guys sounded amazing. I remember just being blown away. And, Daryl championed that record as much as he possibly could with the resources that he had. Yeah. And he put that thing on my desk when I was a music editor to Houston Press and said, you got to hear this thing.
He was passionate.
Yeah, and I was just, my mind was blown. And I saw you guys at Rudyard's. And, I think I did a write-up, and you probably look it up. I probably did a glowing review in the Houston Press. I think you and I did an interview, I think, or something like that.
The next morning.
Yeah, or something like that. And, and then I ended up moving back to Philadelphia and bringing the record back with me. And that's where it got hopelessly lost because I gave it to somebody who liked it and I never saw it again. And then, of course, you couldn't get it anywhere. So I'm like, when am I ever going to see this record again? Yeah. And then finally it came out again back in 2012 and finally was able to rescue. I honestly remember having email discussions and phone discussions with this friend begging him to give me that record back. And he's like,
but you've got it now.
I've got it now.
Okay.
I've got it now. But so yeah, it was this record that just had this mystique to it almost from the beginning because of all the weird stuff that went on around it and making it, distributing it, all this crazy stuff.
Yeah. There's a thing that Britt said in, I can't remember where he said it because I read a bunch of shit over the last few days, but there was one thing that he said that it was like one of those aspirational albums for those of us like around you in your scene. You know what I mean? At that time where you're like,
right.
Oh shit, this dude did this. Like,
yeah.
Well, we gotta rethink what we're doing here. Not to be more like you, but this guy's doing the best work he can do. Are we doing the best work we can do? And I feel like that was a real, at least like the ripple that went throughout this scene. You know, it's almost like David when he put out that before this Euphoria, he had that 4-track Mind album that it was just kind of like, I need to push my 4-track a little harder. You know what I mean?
You need to step it up.
Yeah.
I mean, and you could argue that Spoon's Kontiki was probably Girls Can Tell.
That was for me,
yeah. Yeah, and you wonder how much your record may have, that was his kind of perfect pop record that he did, and then he moved on to the more Spoonish type stuff with the funky stuff. Yeah. That was really his straight pop record. It's my favorite Spoon. Still my favorite Spoon.
You never worked with Mike McCarthy?
Never worked with Mike. He's great.
Not even just one song?
No. I don't.
It's interesting because I
don't know
feel
if
like everybody...
I'm not sure if I've met him.
Oh, really? Like a lot of people, like... you probably would have worked with him if you... Like, there was something about him. I mean, there still is. He's weird. But he...
Yeah, and we're not.
No, I know. Yeah. But there's like a definite, like, I saw Britt like last year or something. We went to Central Machines Works, and we spent like a good 45 minutes just discussing working with Mike.
Oh, interesting.
But no, there's a, yeah, I don't know. I always thought it was odd that you guys didn't do something together.
Know. Yeah, I feel like at that point, it was really important for me to go be the recordist, because what I discovered was that I needed to be not just the guy that came up with the idea, but I needed to actually be the one putting the paint on the canvas, because that's where the action was for me. And I don't know why that is. George used to tell me that when we would work on anything at his house, in his studio. He would say, I'll let you come up here and mix as long as it's your hands on the board, because I want it to be you that channels it. Yeah. And I think it's not the approach for everybody. There are those artists that really need to walk into, we're best served if they walk into a nice studio and they've got the engineer and they've got everything in place. Yeah. I think for me, for some reason, whatever my unique gifts are, is I have to, it's more interesting if I'm the one doing the recording. Yeah.
So is the shadow of Kontiki over everything you've done since? Like,
no. I would say every record has had its own story for me. So the next record we did, every record has kind of I wouldn't, maybe a goal or at least an idea. So the first record we did was when we toured on Kontiki, and then the stuff really lifted off in Europe. The band with Dana and Josh and Whit and myself became a really good rock and roll juggernaut.
May I? There is fantastic video of some Spanish television show with the number 3 in it. You know what I'm talking about?
I just saw that.
It's great, man.
It was
it is really good.
In.
Yeah, that's like, as a person that's been in a band and has seen your band a bunch of times, you're like, oh yeah, they were in the middle of the tour, and like you were in it. Like
it was just the road.
Yeah.
Where did you see that?
On YouTube.
Oh wow,
a couple nights ago.
It's out there, and so I wanted to capture that because Cotton is King was the baby band under the tutelage of a very strong-handed producer who had this militant recording style, which I now, as I said, really admire. But it wasn't what we did know is we chose the one producer who wasn't going to make the record that would have been, he had such it's like the drums should kind of hurt you and the guitars should sound really pointed and uncompressed, but it's very cool. He would have actually been the right guy to record Kontiki, on the 4-track. But that was that record. Yeah. Kontiki was that's my collage assembly, working, problem solving becomes the art making. And then big picture, I thought, well, here's an opportunity to make just to capture the whoosh of this band. And so it did that. And I remember Dana coming to me after I'd done some rough mixes and saying, can you fuck it up?
All right. Yeah.
And I said, no. I really can't. I can just kind of lay some stuff on top of it. But there's no oxygen left. When you and Josh play, and when Whit and I play, there's no oxygen left on the oxide.
You'd become a different band.
It's just, it's done. I'm decorating a very perfectly baked cake at this point. Yeah. And there's enough in that. The artistry in that record is more in the storytelling and the guitar sounds, and it's so textured. And there was some interesting stuff done on the big picture that people don't realize, which is that all the songs are recorded at one tempo and then slowed down on my tape deck, which is why it sounds so dark and heavy. Yeah. Dana played and plays very precisely. He's got just this perfect metronomic thing that he can do that drummers really, especially drummers, go, wow. You know, he's got this thing.
Internal click track.
It's the way that he plays, and he's right on it. Kind of almost like in a Kenny Aronoff style, except I prefer Dana's playing. But anyway, at some point, he thought it sounds a little too fast the way we took it. Can you slow it down? I slowed down the tape, and what I found is that when I slowed him down, he didn't fall apart like most drummers kind of would. He was so precise that it just made the whole track deeper and have more swing,
right.
and made the low end massive, and the whole thing sounded so sad.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh yeah, this is what. So all the guitars sound so big, and it's all sad because it's all dropped a full step.
Wow.
So we recorded 40 Watt Solution, for instance, in E flat, and I sang it in D.
Wow.
Oh.
And so, but anyway, that was that record. Then Cotton Mather and Run Its Course. The record that was a little more like Kontiki was the first Future Clouds record.
Yeah.
And there's, Peoria was crazy because that had its own crazy story. And then the stuff that we did since the reboot, those were more about the wacky thing, or well, that's the wrong word. I think maybe the chance aspect was the I Ching being the prompts. So that was just more about me being thrown off by, okay, I got to come up with a song in a couple of days.
Right.
But the recording of those things were somewhat uniform, and we were less of a band. Whit was really more of a part-time person who'd come over and record a little bit of stuff, and George, before he got sick, had limited time. We weren't real. It was so that was more just about the songs, collections of songs. So I would suspect the next thing might be a little more in that Future Clouds and Kontiki vein.
Oh, well, that's nice to know.
Yeah. So it's 2023. We're in South by Southwest, and you guys are playing shows. What are you like in 2023 when Cotton Mather plays a show? What are you wanting to get out of this South by Southwest at this point?
It's interesting. I wanted to do South by Southwest this year because it's a healthy thing to throw yourself back out there.
Yeah.
And particularly, I hadn't played it since COVID, and I did a solo record. People heard my solo record.
Amazing. Is that Watching the Kid Come Back?
Yeah,
I love that album.
Yeah, it's a
Thank
great
you.
record.
Yeah.
And it was, again, we talk about records and why they are what they are, and they have a purpose. That was very much I'm sitting in this cabin in Dripping Springs by myself during COVID. And I was feeling like a lot of people during COVID, somewhat melancholy.
Yeah.
Life was kind of dog-eared,
Yeah.
And I was there just with my son in missing his senior year of high school, having his senior year at home, and he spent a lot of time with me on that record. That was kind of like my Nebraska. Now, people heard that record and thought, he's entering his more golden phase. This is the more staid, reserved Robert Harrison. He's put away Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and he must be listening a lot to John Prine. And I can understand how you might conclude that, but I was like, no, it's just COVID, and I'm sitting in my cabin. I don't have friends who will come out and see me right now.
Yeah.
So, so part of it is get back out there.
Yeah.
Part of it is, but it's funny. I've done South by for a lot, enough, and I've gone through enough and seen enough things that I certainly don't feel jaded by the music business. I just look at it very probably differently than most people. I don't. I feel a little bit like the one kid at the party who knows that Santa is not real.
Yeah. You're not out there waiting for showbiz to adopt you. And
I'm fine if if they try again.
Yeah.
They've never quite given it a go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a chance to play, and we do have fans who will come and who will be seeing us for the first time. And I love when I first started doing this. My least favorite thing to do is to play live, because I had the kind of on the Cotton is King stuff. I felt like I was trying to do magic tricks. Mm-hmm. And my first thing when I was a kid was I was a magician. Look at this beautiful red silk. I would do birthday parties. Yeah. And I think it was the idea that you either pulled the trick off or you didn't. Yeah. There was that sensibility to it. Now I think it's probably my favorite part of it, is playing live.
The immediacy of it is just being in that moment.
Anything you talk about arbitrary. Yeah, you talk about the gaps. It's all gaps up there.
Yeah, and so the band that you're playing with live now is obviously Whit.
No, Chris Gebhardt on guitar.
Okay,
Darren on drums.
Oh,
and Mike St. Clair on bass.
On bass. Okay.
Yeah,
Chris Gebhardt's an amazing guitar player.
Yeah, he's been playing with us for a short time, and he's played bass with us for off and on for years through the reboot stuff. Because, of course, George George Reeve plays on both Death of the Cool and Wild Kingdom, but by the time Death of the Cool was coming out, he was too sick to play, right. And so Chris stepped in, who had played with Future Clouds and Radar.
I was at that show. The release, the 310 show.
Oh, the 310, right. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
Jesus.
That was a heavy show. Just
crying with Lars Göransson.
Yeah.
But it felt good. It was nice to be in that room and hearing and seeing you guys play. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, not to be weird, but I think you had pictures behind him. Yeah.
So, for those of you who don't know, George had played on that record, and then in the May of 2017, we had a show at the 310, which happened to just be 3 days after he passed.
Oh, that's how soon it was?
It was very raw.
It was. I was kind of I didn't know how you were doing it. Like, honestly, I remember just thinking, like, geez, how's he doing this?
I remember getting home and calling South Austin Music, because I'd done soundcheck, and I'd lost my iPad at soundcheck, and I had gone to South Austin Music on the way home to pick up a tuner. And I called Bill at South Austin Music. I think someone gave me his home number, and I said, Bill, I think I left my iPad at South Austin Music, and I've got a show, and he said, Robert, you were there, but you also weren't there.
Yeah,
It's like you're not in your body. Yeah, So it was that was a strange show, but we all got through it together. Yeah, he was. Did you know him, Hobart?
I'd met him a few times on and off early on, but I had a pretty good sense of the outpouring, the response of his passing, and what I saw on social media and everything else of what. Yeah, and the funny thing is Darren and I had a discussion about him yesterday or the day before when he picked me up from the airport, and he said the exact same thing that you guys were saying. What an advocate he was for everybody.
Oh, man.
I mean, everybody that was close to him, he just was a champion for everybody, and was able to pick the strengths out of each person and just celebrate those things really well. Yeah.
Which is the quality you really want in and not just a sideman and a great producer. So when I first met George about playing Cotton Mather, he called me and said, I'd asked him so many times if he would join Cotton Mather, and finally we got offered a trip to Japan. And I called him and said, George, it's Robert Harrison. I just want to ask you one more time about maybe doing Cotton Mather, because now we've got a trip to Japan. I'm waiting for him to say, I still can't do it, man. I've got too much stuff with Charlie and whatever. He's going to Charlie Sexton, who he played with, because there was always plenty of good reasons. Because he had told me how much he really liked the music. And the line got quiet, and he said, I'll meet you at Swedish Hill in 30 minutes, which he lived near, nice, Swedish Hill Bakery. So I meet him there. And we sat down and we had coffee, and he said he really wanted to do it. He'd always wanted to go to Japan, and we talked for a bit. And then he very earnestly looked at me and said, but here's the thing, Robert Harrison, you have to pay me a lot of money to tell me what to play. Which is a pretty ballsy thing to tell a band leader.
Sure.
And I said, I said, okay, we'll work it out or something. I'm sure I was uncomfortable at that level of confrontation with this guy I barely knew, who I thought was probably the coolest guy I'd met.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I kind of acquiesced in the moment. Well, the story evolved over time. So by the time years passed and George would tell the story, he would say that he said that, and that I replied, "Well, why don't you play what I like and save me a lot of money?"
Yeah.
But I never would have said that. And my story, why I relate this, is that was the ultimate sideman, because when he retold the story, he made me look better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of the squirming, acquiescing band leader that I'm sure I was.
Right.
Great story.
That is a great story. Well, man, Hobart, is there anything else you want to ask?
No, I think we had a nice discussion here.
Yeah.
Covered quite a bit of ground.
Yeah, if you have anything else, I'm happy to answer. Song specific or anything like that.
I'm sure there's a lot else. There is fortunately, I did a lot of research on the song. There's a lot about the songs out there. There's are those the stories of the songs that you sent me? Are those available like on your Patreon and stuff like that?
No, but they're out there. I should put them available there. I would just say the only thing is that the record was mostly done here on the 4-track and the ADAT.
Right.
And then one of the great things that Daryl did was that he connected me with Brad Jones, who was a Svengali in Nashville, a mix
Brad
engineer.
Is great, amazing, yeah.
And we became very good friends after 4 days of him not killing me.
Right.
Because I showed up at his house with a grocery sack of cassette tapes and ADAT.
I remember that story.
And he had no idea what he had signed up for. I just sent him rough mixes, and he called me, and he was genuinely really enthusiastic about what he heard. And he said, yeah, let's do this. He had no idea what he had signed up for. And then being the genius he is and so resourceful, he managed to get 3 or 4 ADATs. And because the tapes had all been made via submixing.
Right.
So I would fill up one ADAT,
Sure.
submix it onto 2, and drop that onto a cassette.
Yeah.
Brad somehow had to figure out how it all fit together and piece it together, and he did. And then after 4 days of that, we got to mixing. But he had several really great ideas of things to add that we added there. There was no Mellotron on the record before I went to Nashville.
Okay.
There was
wow.
Is that what the flutes are on Spin My Wheels?
Yes.
Okay.
And so the original arrangement of Spin My Wheels was verse, Ebo solo, verse, Ebo solo, Oz at the end. Brad had the idea, save the theme. That's the one he changed the most, with his suggestion. So it went, verse, chorus, girl, you spin my wheels, and then the music theme came in at the end, the way he envisioned it.
Yeah.
Starting with the Mellotron, then the Ebo solo, then the Oz. So there were a couple of songs where he suggested an arrangement change, which he was managing to do on ADAT, which to me was like, I felt like I met the person who had fire. I didn't understand.
Like he could do the editing in the ADAT?
He did the editing in the ADATs on some other machine, and it was wild.
Wow.
This is all pre-Pro Tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna
So,
say.
yeah. So that's all. I just wanted to give.
No, and something we chatted about briefly after the gig the other night was the potential for Kontiki to come back on vinyl at some point.
Yes, it will. I mean, we have. It's one of those things. It's a little maddening. It's a record that's not available, and Cotton Mather's only, except for the first record, which came out on a label for 11 months. It's only been tiny licensing deals around the world. There's never really been a label involved. I just feel like, the sad thing is, I'm the label, and that's just. If you spend any amount of time with me, you know that you can understand that's not probably the best move.
Yeah.
But Kontiki is distributed through. I'm distributed through a really cool company called Mono Stereo, but we have the rights to it, or I have the rights to the Kontiki. So I'm trying to find someone else to put that out because it's
God, what a great thing to have on vinyl. That would be a great one
That'd
to
be
have
awesome.
on vinyl. Yeah.
it'll be cool, man.
Yeah.
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 Or on 12 vinyl singles.
Would we get special colored
It's a pretty
vinyl?
labor-intensive listening
Special colored vinyl,
experience.
maybe?
Oh, yeah. Isn't there were special colored. Isn't there orange
It's
vinyl
not
that's out there?
intensive if you're high.
It seems to be the recurring theme of this.
Listen,
whole
I listened
interview.
to Kontiki when I was high.
You did?
Yeah. I obviously probably a lot. Probably first time I ever heard it, I was high. But yeah, it's great. It's fine high. And it's also, I listened to it in the morning in Scottsdale the other day, like
Wow.
8 in the morning.
How does it do in Arizona?
It sounds amazing.
I don't think we've sold a copy in Florida yet.
No?
Oh,
No.
boy. We'll have to work that out.
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah.
We got people there. You've got people there.
Yeah, we've got people there. And yeah, I mean, to sum up, I just think that I think what I love about the record the most, other than the songs are amazing, is this push and pull between lo-fi and
Yes.
hi-fi
Yeah.
that you get on that record. It's just it's not, you know, it was made like a lo-fi record, but it sounds wonderful. It does not sound like a lo-fi record.
Yeah.
Well, I was figuring out, Hobart, as I went, I did discover, once I had been messing around on that ADAT and 4-track for a while, and of course I'd been goofing around with this stuff since college. One of the things I began to discover on that record was that I really liked recording. And in some cases, it was abysmally done. In some cases, I kind of got it right. And I had a good instinct for sound. I also discovered that the other guitar player besides me, that it sounded different when I put the mic in front of his amp than when I put it in front of mine. And I discovered, well, maybe it has to do with the players. Yeah, and
Yeah.
most of the drums are one mic on the drums. Mm-hmm. But also, Dave McNair, he lent me a hand on the recording of the 4-track stuff. Mm-hmm. His Cole's mic on the, and also
that's cool.
this is there is a secret to Kontiki. Yes, it is 4-track, and yes, it is ADAT, but the preamps are all API 550.
Oh, okay.
In Joe's studio.
Okay.
So we had really good preamps there
Yeah.
in this little studio. It was all an Elisa's cheap compressor, and then it's me, you know, trying to record, and it's sometimes, you know, blowing. I did blow up my Roland Space Echo.
Well, they're old.
I had bought it the day before, so it was kind of sad.
I'm sorry about that. Well, dude, thank you
gotta
so
go.
much for the constant inspiration and for making such a great album that was so aspirational for the other people in the scene. I'm still thinking of different 4-track guys: David Garza, Britt Daniel, Darren. Darren really was like the George Martin of
Yeah,
4-track.
His Beatles stuff is just
I still play it for
incredible.
people.
Yeah, it's just mind-blowing. In its own way.
Darren is a force to behold.
Yeah. Well, you are, my friend. And also, people can find you at robertharrisonmusic.com. And this latest record, Watching the Kid Come Back, is really great.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
fantastic
really
work.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
And do have that Patreon thing in case anyone is really curious about that. You can join my list of, you know,
Patrons.
garden shed wielding, you know, tools people.
There you
know,
go. Okay.
firebrands.
Yeah. You can find all of that at robertharrisonmusic.com.
That's right. And cottonmather.com coming soon.
Okay. Thanks for doing the show.
Thanks, buddy.
My co-host.
Hey, it was such a blast.
Thanks for having
Yeah.
me.
What a treat to talk
Thanks
about
for
this
Magnet.
record again,
Yeah.
huh? Yeah, oh yeah. Magnet's hanging in here. We're still out there. We're
Yeah.
still doing our thing.
Yeah, Magnet Classic Podcast. Look it up.
Yep.
I share them whenever they come out. I'm a huge fan.
I'm working on my latest
Can you
podcast.
say what it is?
Yeah, it's the anniversary of I want to say 25th, maybe 20th. Pernice Brothers Overcome by Happiness. If you've
I don't
if
even
you've
know
heard
that
of
album.
It's their first sub pop release. Beautiful pop record. Speaking of chamber, more chamber pop, but really good stuff. So that's going to be the next one we're working on. That's going to be reissued on New West.
Oh, fantastic.
So New West is going to be putting that out, and so I get to talk to Joe in about a week. We're going to sit down for an hour or two and talk about the record. Joe Pernice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Hobart, and thank you, me.
Enjoy
thank
the
you,
rest
Robert.
of South by.
Yeah, you enjoy the rest of this. Have a great show tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.